I see I'm a chairman. I've been promoted, possibly global vice president as well. Um, so thank you for that introduction. And I'm obviously equally reflective on the loss of Charlie Munger, who's always much cleverer and much pithier than me talking at events like this. But I was asked to come and explain AI and everything else, and only to take about 20 minutes and not talk too fast. I can probably manage 2 of those, although maybe not all 3. Um, but I thought it would be kind of useful to start with a quote from another important influence in our lives, Bill Gates, who said this spring that in his life he had seen 2 technology that he thought was revolutionary. The first was the graphical user interface back at Xerox PARC in the 1970s, and the second was ChatGPT. And you may have noticed that people have got quite excited about ChatGPT. These are headlines for the main technology news site. This is how excited people are about AI and how excited they were about the iPhone back now almost over 10 years ago. So this has become something that the entire tech industry has become hugely excited about. It's also now what pretty much every new startup is working on. These are startups at Y Combinator, the main incubator in Silicon Valley. Today, if you're not working on generative AI, there's probably something wrong with you, and people will kind of go away and talk to somebody else. And even as the venture industry in general is now in something of a crash as we come out of all of the excitement of the pandemic, all of the investment is now surging into AI. And even outside of the tech industry, there's now a huge amount of excitement. This is a survey from McKinsey on how many executives outside of the tech industry have at least played with generative AI, which mostly means ChatGPT. So again, everybody's interested, everybody's excited. A few years ago, you may have heard big companies saying that they needed to have a 5G strategy. Now the answer is definitely you need an AI strategy. And OpenAI itself, despite the drama last week, it seems to be doing pretty well. 100 million people using ChatGPT every week, something over $1 billion of revenue, which is kind of a record for something that didn't exist a year ago. And indeed, of course, we have a rush to regulate as global policymakers try and catch up with this and, of course, try and get some headlines for themselves. However, we still have to kind of work out, well, what actually is this and what does it mean? Everybody in the tech industry has spent the last 12 months walking around, so to speak, holding onto the top of their head with both hands, saying, oh my God, this is amazing, long pause, and then, yes, but what is it? And so I think there's a sort of a base case view that says this is sort of like the iPhone or the internet. It's another of these platform shifts that rolls through the tech industry every 10 or 15 years. Then you have the Bill Gates view that says, no, this is a rather more important change. This is more like a once every 20 or 30 or 40-year shift in what technology could be. And then there's a minority view that says, no, this will take us all the way to artificial general intelligence. This will take us to HAL 9000 and the Terminator. This will take us something that will sort of fundamentally change the nature of the world. And everyone is kind of trying to work out how we would fit this within those kinds of frameworks. So first, I thought it would be useful just to sit and think about how we try and understand what generative AI might be. And to do that, I wanted to go back and talk about the last wave of machine learning in 2013. Large language, neural networks, machine learning, deep learning started working, and you would have demos like this, and I would show them to big companies, and they would say, well done, that's very clever. Why do we care? You can recognize a dog or a chair. And so it wasn't obvious that this was a scientific breakthrough that would have much broader consequences. And we went through a period of kind of trying to work out what are the right levels of abstraction to understand machine learning. So it's not just image recognition, it's not just a whole other class of unsolved problem like language translation, natural language processing, speech recognition. Really, the way to understand this was that this was pattern recognition. And then as a big company, you had to work out, well, what is it that we could turn into pattern recognition? And there were obvious things like fraud detection or credit scoring, but then there were also a lot of other things that didn't look like pattern recognition that you understood, you slowly realized you could turn into pattern recognition, and then you could automate them with machine learning. We now go through, I think, the same process with the second wave of machine learning with large language models. Again, you get the amazing demo. So I use Midjourney to make a picture of cats. This is very cool. It's also not obvious why this is useful. I can also ask ChatGPT to write me a song about Tesla and SpaceX. And again, it works. It's a song. It rhymes. It scans. It's not obvious what this is good for. You push a little bit further. Supposing you're going on holiday somewhere next week and you want to know what to do. You could go to Google and open 30 tabs in Chrome, or you could just go and ask ChatGPT, what should I do that week? which gets you this phrase generative search. And so that starts getting a little bit more interesting and starting to challenge some kind of $100 billion revenue models. And then you can push it a little bit further and say, can you maybe explain something? What happens if you can explain a joke or explain a math problem? And so this starts to look like maybe this is doing some reasoning, which seems like it might be more interesting again. And at that, people stop and think, okay, where exactly is this going to go? How far will this take us? Is this pattern creation or is this something else? However, you also have to be a little bit careful. So imagine for some bizarre reason you actually wanted to know something about me, and so you went to ChatGPT and you asked it, and it would give you this biography, and it says that Benedict Evans is a hugely important and influential person, which is obviously true, and that I went to Cambridge and I worked at a couple of different companies, worked at Andreessen Horowitz. This is all roughly right. Hit reload. Oops, no, I went to a different university, different degree, different jobs, different companies. Reload. Oh, no, back to Cambridge again. Went to work for, no, I didn't work for The Guardian. I think I applied for a job at Atlas Ventures, but I certainly didn't get hired there. And so what is it that this is doing? Well, these all look like biographies of someone like me, but they aren't biographies of me. So what this is doing is it's not answering the question, it's matching a pattern. This is a great example from earlier this year. Somebody asked ChatGPT, what's the most cited economics paper of all time? The paper that it describes here doesn't actually exist, but it's what the paper would be likely to be. So what kinds of papers, by what kinds of authors, about what kinds of subjects. So it's matching a pattern. I think a really good way to understand what's happening here is I asked Midjourney to make a fantasy 1960s French sports car. This looks like a sports car. It looks French. It's got kind of a Citroen vibe. It also has 2 steering wheels and no door. And that's not lying exactly. It doesn't know what steering wheels are. It knows that images like that have a shape like that in roughly that place. This can be kind of deceptive. You've probably seen some news stories about people relying on these systems and getting them wrong. This is a great survey that Deloitte did. People who've used these things tend to think that they're accurate because they haven't really thought about what they're doing or tested them properly. They're kind of misleading. And so everyone in tech is kind of trying to work out, how would you think about this? The most interesting framing I heard is that this tends to be bad at things that computers are good at, and good at things that computers tend to be bad at. So it's not predictable, it doesn't do logic, it's not a database, it doesn't do kind of reliable information retrieval. On the other hand, it's very good at a bunch of things that you could never use computers to do before. And so if we come back to that framing, like what's the right level of abstraction to understand this? You can start by saying maybe this is pattern creation, and that seems like a kind of a good technical description of what's happening. And then you could push a little further and say, well, maybe this is doing synthesis or summary or search or explanation. It's a way of retrieving information and describing it. And then you can push further again and say, maybe what this is doing some kind of reasoning or explanation or understanding. Maybe it's some kind of engine for reasoning. The framing that I always like talking about the last wave of machine learning was that it gives you infinite interns. So you would like to listen to every call coming into your call center and tell me if the customer sounds nervous or if the service agent is being rude. And you don't need an expert for that. You could probably get a 10-year-old to do that, but you don't have enough interns. Machine learning gives you infinite interns. Anything you could get an intern to do now, you could automate. And that seems like kind of a useful first wave of thinking about what you might be able to do with generative AI. How is it that you think about things that you could automate, things that match a pattern, things where you can align with that error rate, that question of probability. And so the first 2 things where people are doing a lot is on the one side, using it as a coding assistant, effectively creating auto-suggest and generating code, things where everything has to be exactly right, but you can see the mistakes. And on the other side, things where there aren't really mistakes, things where there's no such thing as a wrong answer, just good or bad answers. And so that gets you things like brainstorming, creation, lists, marketing copy, and things like that. And so that is a sort of a base case of thinking about what you can do with this. Fits quite nicely into the classic framing of technology as moving forward in a series of S-curves, a series of platform shifts. And so in the last 50 or 60 years, we had mainframes and PCs and the web and smartphones, and each of these took sort of 10 or 15 years. And then there was another platform shift after that. And so the base case is to say that generative machine learning kind of fits into that framing. It's the next platform shift. And as you go through these platform shifts, you kind of get engineering questions and you get value capture questions. Then you get kind of questions for outside of the tech industry is what will change once you've deployed this? And those obviously kind of intersect and reinforce each other. And so we have engineering questions right now, the gold rush to get GPU capacity from NVIDIA, to get compute capacity to run these models. You also get a gold rush to try and create more and more models and to get them to catch up with the performance of ChatGPT. And there's a whole question about how many models there will be and who will have them and whether they'll be open or closed. But for the rest of this, this looks like product. And so you ask, well, what sort of products come out of this? And the classic framing with each of these platform shifts is that the incumbents always try and make the new thing a feature. And so Google and Microsoft today are rapidly implementing large language models as part of their Office products, as part of Microsoft Office, as part of Google Docs. Then you have startups that try and use it to unbundle, that try and kind of pull apart some piece of the incumbent business. And then every now and then, people find a way to actually change the entire nature of the market. So today, every text box on the internet is getting an LLM. This is LinkedIn because obviously LinkedIn doesn't have enough predictable generic content sprayed all over it, so we need AI to make more of it. Slightly more interesting, Amazon has already started deploying image generators to help merchants create product shots, so you can customize your product shot, create another product shot. This is a perfect example of AI is giving you interns. This is exactly what you would get the intern to do. Now you can get AI to do it. But I think it's more interesting to push a bit further and say, well, how is it that the tool actually changes what we do? Because with every new tool, to begin with, you make the tool fit the way you're already doing the job. And then over time, you change the job in order to fit the new tool. This is the process we went through with PCs and with the web and with smartphones, with cloud, with the last wave of machine learning. It should be the process that we go through with this. This is a still from a movie called The Apartment from 1960. Jack Lemmon, in the middle, in the second row, is a clerk in an insurance company in Midtown Manhattan. Everybody you see here has a typewriter and a Rolodex and an electromechanical adding machine made by our company called Friden. Basically, everybody you see here is a cell in a spreadsheet, and the whole building is a giant Excel file. Once a week, someone on the top floor presses F9, and the whole building kind of recalculates from top to bottom and generates new insurance prices. In 1965, they bought a mainframe. They threw away all of those adding machines. They automated all those jobs. But somehow they employed just as many people, but they changed how the insurance business worked. And to begin with, they used the mainframe to automate what Jack Lemmon was doing. Then over time, you kind of change how you might run the business or what kind of things you might be able to do with that. This is kind of the process that we're going through now. But if I go back to that quote from Bill Gates, there's kind of another theory here, which is to say, no, this isn't like the web or like smartphones or the PC. This is more like a fundamental shift in what you can do with computers. And so what he's saying about the GUI here is that what the GUI did was it meant that you changed who could use computers because you didn't have to memorize keyboard commands and type them in. Instead, you could just click on what you wanted. And so that was a fundamental change in who could use computers. But then somebody has to have made the thing you're clicking on. Someone has to have made that tool. And so if you want a piece of software to do a thing, you need people to click on it. What ChatGPT does is provide you all of those tools without you having to create them one by one. So there is this possibility that this is a fundamental change in the levels of abstraction. That with GUIs, with command line, you have to learn the commands. With the GUI, you see the options and click on them. With generative AI, maybe you can just tell the computer what you want. At least that's what Bill Gates is sort of proposing. I'm not entirely sure this is true. When I look at ChatGPT today, I'm not sure this is a product so much as a technology demo. And in fact, it kind of reminds me of Excel. You open Excel and you think, what is it that I'm supposed to do? And Microsoft gives you all of these suggestions. But then all of those suggestions have been unbundled into companies. And at a certain point, you don't use Excel anymore. You use a dedicated piece of software. In fact, kind of the classic quote here, I think, is from Jim Barksdale, that there are two ways you can make money. You can bundle or you can unbundle. And what seems to be happening now is that OpenAI are bundling everything else into ChatGPT, and every other tech company is working out how to unbundle ChatGPT. Now, I'm just going to wrap up in 1 or 2 minutes more before I stop talking. If we zoom out from AI and think about everything else that's happening, it seems to me there's a sort of a sequence in how technology hits the rest of the world. The tech industry spends a lot of time talking about what will happen in 2025 or 2030. Nobody in tech wants to talk about crypto or metaverse today, but they're actually still kind of interesting, important technologies. Now everyone wants to talk about generative AI. Meanwhile, all actual software companies are deploying ideas from 2010, SaaS, automation, workflow, collaboration, machine learning. And meanwhile, most of the rest of the economy is being overturned by ideas from 2000, ideas like maybe people will buy things on the internet or watch video on the internet. And so we have e-commerce continuing to accelerate upwards. We had this kind of great blip in the pandemic, but is now almost exactly back on the trend line, but back on a trend line at something over 20%. And I think we kind of forget how small the internet used to be and how much bigger it's become. When Apple launched the original Mac, they only sold 200,000 units. When Mosaic kicked off the consumer internet, there were maybe 50 to 60 million consumer PCs on the entire planet. Now something over 5 billion people have a smartphone. And I think the best way to express what that means is this study from the US of online dating, that 50% of new relationships in the USA now start online. So technology has gone from being something that was always kind of exciting and interesting, but not actually a basic part of everybody's life, to just a kind of a basic part of how we all live and how we all do business. So we have entirely new companies being created that just presume everybody is online. Shein sold $30 billion of fast fashion last year, overtaking Zara and H&M, and that's just a company that presumes every teenage girl has a smartphone. IKEA is now opening flagship stores in the center of major cities, shifting away from their platform of being on the edge of town, as they think about what it means that all of their customers are online and maybe don't want to go to the edge of a city. We now have insurgent banks, neobanks, using smartphones as a route to market to bypass legacy banks and using that to build a better user experience. This is showing how many taps it takes to open a bank account for insurgent banks on the left as opposed to legacy banks on the right. And as I look at those questions, it seems to me that none of these questions are really software questions anymore. What's going to happen to television? I don't know, ask a TV analyst. What's going to happen to the car industry as the Chinese start exporting? I don't know, ask a car analyst. These are all questions that come from the industries being changed by tech. These are no longer software questions. And indeed, I think cars are kind of a useful analogy for a lot of this stuff. That you could say the first 50 years of the car industry was what's a car, but the second 50 years was what happens when everybody has a car. How does every other industry get changed? That's kind of what's happening with software now. The first 50 years was what's a computer. The second 50 years is what happens now that everybody on Earth is online. And with that, I will say thank you.